And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Howdy folks, I'm Tom Vasel and welcome to the Dice Tower. Today we're taking a look at Brass Birmingham. Now a couple things I want to say at the beginning of this video. I reviewed Brass when it first came out from Martin Wallace a long time ago. My opinions on Brass have changed considerably from that initial review. They just recently last year reprinted Brass. It came out, they had two versions of it. They reprinted the original Brass, and then they also reprinted an updated version, some changes, Brass Birmingham. From what I can tell, everyone likes this version better. Maybe not everyone, but most people do. In my play group, it is easily one of the most popular games that's played there. I've seen it played almost every week, and in fact, when I decided to play this, I found the most avid enthusiasts of the game to play it with them, because I was very curious what everyone thought about it. So I don't like it. Yeah, I know. It's like, I almost feel like that's a confession of sorts, because the game is so highly ranked and it's so highly lauded and everyone goes bananas over it. So in that sort of sense, anybody, a reviewer included, feels kind of weird coming on and saying you don't like it because you're obviously doing something wrong, right? Well, not necessarily. It just isn't my style. Here's the thing. I can tell you, it's a pretty good game. It just isn't my style at all. So what I figured I would do with this review is, instead of telling you how to play the game and all that, yada, 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 people know that you can find many reviews out there and playthroughs of Brass. Go watch those if you want to see how to play the game. I'm just going to take some things to break down what I did like and what I didn't like about the game. Let's start with the components. Stunning, terrific, amazing, wonderful. From really fantastic looking tiles to great player boards. Really like how these player boards look, just really pretty. The symbology is a little smaller maybe than I would want, but oh, these just look good. To the board. Now I think it's interesting, the board has two sides here. We have this side and the darker side. I definitely, while the darker side may look neat, I like the lighter side because it's a little easier to see the stuff on that side. And what are these amazing and cool and neat? The cards are good. My only negative thing about the components in this game is minor, but like here, this is Kittenmeister. I don't know the terrain of this game that well, and so I would prefer if they had shown on here like where on the map that city is. Granted, it's a certain color, brown, and so the brown areas are down here. But that would have been a nice little pop down to show where on the map it was on the card. Like many games that have maps do that. But the artwork is fantastic. I really like the way the cards look. They also provide cards here with the card distribution, which is a little over my head. Maybe really great players can figure that sort of thing out, but also how to play the game. Yeah, A+ from a component perspective. And even the rule book is just really nicely put together, explained well. I mean, this is Roxley, so they're the component master. And, you know, there you go. They just do a fantastic job. I'm also going to say very positive things about the rules themselves. They're not that complex. This is a 12-page rule book, and it just very simply explains how to do the game. Now, even though the rules are simple, doesn't necessarily mean they're easy to grok, but just understanding the gameplay itself and teaching someone is not that difficult. Now, that being said, I have somewhat against Brass, as the rules are, for me, I felt difficult to grok. So one thing that Martin Wallace does in his games is he has a fairly strong sense of historical accuracy. Not always, you can't do that in games to 100 degrees, but he does a pretty good job of it, following historical things and this and that. And I think that's both a blessing and sometimes a curse. It's a blessing because, hey, that's really cool. I'm learning about history. And sometimes it's a curse because, why does this not work? Well, because in this time period, this, and this happened. Sure, I get why that happened in history, but gameplay-wise, and so sometimes there's that caveat, like for example in this game, why can the steel come from anywhere and the coal has to come from somewhere directly? Doesn't make sense to my brain when I look at the game and say, well, why is that way? So I get that this is a game that needs to be played on higher levels, and the more you play, the better you get at it, and the more you play, the better you get at it, the more you play. And that is, again, the sign of a good game. But this game, to me, feels like work. It feels like something that I have to do. When I play games for escapism, whether it's in a fantasy battle realm or if it's something like Le Havre or Caverna, where I'm building this big economic cool empire that's just fun for me to do. I want to get into it. I don't mind thinking hard about stuff, but I feel like when I'm playing Brass Birmingham, I'm thinking hard the entire time I'm playing. I'm just sitting there going, all right, what do I do next? How do I do this? And I don't feel the plethora of options. What happens in a game like this? And again, this is definitely a preference thing, which is kind of why I'm making this video, because I think some people are like me when it comes to these preferences, and some people are like others. Like, I like a game that says, here's a bunch of options, pick which ones are best. Brass Birmingham says, here's some options, but you better find the right one or you're going to lose. That always makes me feel like I'm in a straitjacket, and that's how this game was. It has like a mechanism which for some reason I felt so difficult to remember, where you discard a card no matter what action you take, even if you pass, and it's just remembering to do that was kind of a pain. But as your hand of cards goes down, you are lowering your options, and so at the end of the game I'm like, ooh, I would like to do that, don't have the card for it. I like to do that, can't do that. I like to do that, can't do that. Well, what can I do? Okay, I can do that or that. And I felt many times, for me, as I played in this game, and in the original Brass too, like as the game went by, I felt like, oh, if I had thought about that 3 turns ago, I would be able to do these things. Since I didn't, I can't do it now, so I'm kind of stuck with my stupidity from time gone yore. Again, this is something some people thrive on. To me, I would like to go, wow, I'll do this instead. And here you're kind of like, wow, I'm just going to lose. And I don't find that as entertaining. Now, fortunately, this is not a long game. It's like a 2-hour game, I feel. Maybe a little bit faster when you play with people who know what they're doing. So if you are like, well, I guess I'm not going to win, that's okay. You go on to the next game. But I still did not necessarily like that feeling of despair. I do think it's interesting how the game has to reset halfway through when you get rid of the, you're stopping the canals and going to the railroads, or vice versa. I like that halfway stopping point, because when you play things like Amun-Re, there's a halfway point through that. I find that fascinating. You're like this slow build up, and then it's shrunk down again and you move on. And I find that sort of thing neat. But what I found in this game is strategy is extremely high. Now, you say, wait a minute, Vasel, are you against strategy? Well, not necessarily, but this goes back to my earlier point in that I'm more of a tactics guy, I think. Strategy to me is nebulous. I'll play a game and be like, you know what? I'm going to do this. Oh, I don't like doing that. Pivot! I'll do this. In Brass, the strategy is extremely strong, where you're going to sit there and go, this is what I'm going to do. Now, depending on what other players do and things, you may have to move in that framework, but you need to know what you're going to do many turns ahead. So the strategy, the long-term planning, is much stronger in this game, and it's not new player friendly in that regard. If you play people who play before, you're going to lose, but it's also difficult to kind of formulate. Now, Brass does come on the back here with beginner tips. And they talk about things like this, and the first beginner tip is another reason I'm not a fan of the game is, do not be afraid of taking loans. This is something that, again, is personal to me, but as time goes by, I am less and less intrigued with taking loans in games. Now, Martin Wallace does this in a lot of his games. You do it in Age of Steam, you do it here, you did it in original Brass, you do it here. Maybe part of it's because being in debt for part of my life was such an unfun, stressful experience that I don't like replicating that in games. If you have something bad happen to you, like many of you watching know that my son died. Jack died, and many good things came from that, like the Jack Vasel Memorial Fund. But still, if I watch a movie or a TV show with a young child in peril, it affects me more deeply because of that experience in my life. And games where you take a lot of debt have a similar thing to me, because there was a point in my life where I felt like I was drowning in debt. Thankfully, that's long gone. But I mean, nowadays I'm not like rich, but I'm not in debt anymore. And this constant debt, and in this game, you just have to go into debt, and sometimes go into debt and go into debt. And then you start making money, and it's that tipping point, like when do I stop taking debt? And that's a hard thing to do. And if you take too much debt, then you go back at the end of the game. You're like, if I take in one less loan, and it's a tough thing, right? I'm not a big fan of hurting myself to get better. And I'm not a big fan of taking out big loans in the hope that something good will happen. And that's kind of a backbone to this game to be able to do that. And it says in here, it's not uncommon for experienced players to win the game despite having a low income level. Great, but that high income level is something that I can identify with as a player, and so that whole point thing is a little more waffly for me and not understanding it. And so it talks about the level 2 industry levels. I'm going through the beginner tips here. Level 2 industry tiles are not removed at the end of the canal era, so before we go to the railroads. And that's an interesting fact, right? So you're level 2s. And I found that to be, again, another frustrating factor. Like, ooh, I'm getting the end of era 1. I want to build some more of these level 1 buildings knowing they're about to be wiped out. So remember I talked about that halfway point? That's a neat idea. But it's also, in Amun-Re, it was interesting because you built your empire, then it was like we started another game. Here I'm building up and I felt like, oh, I have to go farther. I even have to get rid of these level 1 buildings before I can build level 2s. And I just felt like that wasn't fun at all. I like to get my engine going, and here I got my engine going, and then it's like, stop, start over again. Oh, but I barely got it going. Now, granted, getting your engine going in round 2 can be better and more rewarding and get you more points. The breweries, it says be careful when developing breweries. Remember, beer is required, so if you have no access, it can be devastating to your long-term strategy. I know! Tiles with that cannot be built during the rail era. I know! Figuring out how to expand your network at the beginning of the rail era can be difficult for beginners. I know! And expand your networks by building rail links to sources of coal. If you don't have access to a coal, build a coal mine. Okay, so a lot of these things are things that some of you watching are going, yeah, Tom, that's the struggles of a beginner. Sure. I played this game multiple times, so I'm still a beginner. I'm not going to question that. I am someone who plays a lot of games. I play more games than most people do, and most games are intuitive. Brass is not. That's not not a knock on the game. But I think to really do well and to really thrive in Brass, I would have to play it 20-some times, really get into it. And when I played the people who were good at Brass, I thought I did okay. You know, I wasn't like getting destroyed, but there was clearly a level of thinking that they had that I didn't. I don't know that I want to work hard to get better at that. I like playing games and getting better, but any game that requires me to put effort, like actual physical, like I work out all the time. I mentally work out too, doing various things. I don't know that I want to mentally work out at Brass specifically. For example, physical workouts, I like walking. I don't even mind running a little bit. I'll do sit-ups. I will not do push-ups or pull-ups. I hate push-ups and pull-ups. That's the same thing here. Mentally, I like Sudoku. I like logic puzzles. I like doing things like that. I don't necessarily like the mental workouts of Brass. It doesn't mean it's a bad workout. It doesn't mean it's not good for you. It's just not my style. Same thing with chess. I don't necessarily like the mental workouts that I need to do for chess. Okay, that's a lot of words for me to say that I'm not the biggest fan of a game. You know what, though? Sticking in the Dice Tower library. You know what, though? People play Brass. Hooray for them. I am glad that they love it. It is in the top rated games on the internet. It is a game that's getting a lot of play, and Roxley has done an amazing job at bringing this to the table. Maybe a lot of what I've said in this review is something that you're watching going, well, I like that stuff. Then good. That's the point of this. The point is not for me to tell you not to get the game. I do that with some games. There's some games no one should own. But this one, a lot of people are going to enjoy. I just want to explain why I wasn't as big of a fan of it. And it's mostly just boils down to this game feels more like work than fun to me. And I want my games for me to be fun. For you, it might be fun. Either way, that's what I think of Brass Birmingham. Sure is a pretty cover, isn't it? Dice Tower Judgment, don't like it, but others will.